we need to forgive everybody, including ourselves. Now, forgiveness can be a easy thing for some and a challenging thing for others. And it seems to me that the people who can easily can most easily forgive others are the people who have such a hard time forgiving themselves. And the people who can so easily forgive themselves seem to hold grudges and cannot forgive others. And that's just an observation that I have made. I'm not here to say one, well, I guess I will. It is obviously better to be easy to forgive others and hard to forgive oneself because, that is being strict with oneself and tolerant with others. But for the people who have such a hard time forgiving themselves, you need to remind yourself that, and even for people who have a hard time forgiving others, forgiveness in general, all anyone ever does is what they believe is best. That is all anyone has ever done, and that's all anyone will ever do. Socrates says, no one is willingly deprived of the truth. And he also brings up the point, if you hand someone two options and it's clear one is the lesser evil, they will choose the lesser evil. They will not choose that which is worse. They will not choose that which will not be best for them and not be best for their happiness. And we all do this. We all do this. We all think, well, no, I guess not we all, but people think self. I think there is selfless actions, but it comes to a point where you can think about selfless actions and think, well, what if that person didn't do that selfless action? Would they have been able to live with themselves? Would they have been able to still have peace of mind? I think behind a lot of selfless actions, there's selfish intent. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually potentially the mark of a virtuous person because they understand that if I don't do this, if I don't do this virtuous action and I do this harmful, disgraceful action, then I'll feel bad about it. So I'll do the virtuous action. There's nothing wrong with that, but there is a hint of selfishness behind it. And that's why I think everyone, even the people who seem to be doing, the person who gives anonymous to charity, gets a little boost inside from doing something anonymous that is nice. And, maybe they derive the most the most pleasure from doing things behind closed doors where nobody knows it's them. And I would say that's the most virtuous way to do it. But that doesn't mean there isn't selfish intent behind it. But my point with that is that everyone is doing what they believe is best for themselves, and that's you included. So what you're having a hard time forgiving yourself for or forgiving others for, remind yourself that you or them thought in that moment that this was the best action. This was the thing to do. This was what would bring me my happiness, my peace. And obviously, we don't say that to ourselves when we act on a temporary emotion that we so instantly regret. But sometimes the urges we have can be so powerful that the best thing seems like to just get rid of the urge and just act on that which is we are yearning to act on, I guess, because it's an urge. Sometimes that seems like the best thing to do, and then you act, and then you think, how stupid, how foolish. Now I have to live with the consequences of acting on this temporary emotion and making it a permanent problem that I will have to deal with the rest of my life. My main point is even the things we know we shouldn't do, sometimes we do, and we think it's the best thing to do. whether it's, as I said, to get rid of the urge, or we're just in a weird place when our brain at that moment, and for a split second, a value we hold changes, and we act, and then we regret it. And I think this is something that should be pitied. This is not something that we should use hate with. We should not hate the person who thought that that thing would bring them tranquility, happiness, peace of mind. It is pitiful that people think that, doing egregious, horrible actions would somehow bring them happiness, peace, tranquility. But it's clear that people do believe this, because there's a lot of, quote unquote evil in the world. But I say quote unquote because, is it truly evil if you have the same intentions as someone else? That you did what you thought was best, they did what they thought was best. Intentions are all that matter. You guys both did what you thought was best. And I think we need to realize that if we were in the same position, with the same experiences, the same upbringing, the same everything, we would have made the same decision. We like to think that this is not the case. We like to think that we are morally excellent, and that, oh, I can never do that. It's like nowadays you ask how many people would have owned slaves, and it's probably, like, just 99%, 99.99% people would say no. There's no way I would have owned slaves. And you say, oh, okay, well, so you're the 0.01% who throws it all the way to, you're part of the Underground Railroad, you're helping the slaves, and everyone, oh yes, of course, of course. But how interesting is that? 99% of it's a complete flip. 99% of people would have them, 99% of people wouldn't. And you can't even see the point of view of someone who would. But you weren't raised in that world. And that's why it's, to me, slavery is obviously not good, but it's so crazy to me how people judge the people back in the day who had them. They should be judged, but because not everyone did. There was the 0.1% who stood up, and those people were virtuous. But I think we need to be kinder and, forgive, because it is hard. And I'm sure there's something nowadays, that 99% of people do. And, in, 200 years, it's going to completely flip. And they're going to think that this generation and the people who inhabited the world in, the years 2000, they were monsters and they did horrible things. They were destroying the climate, and they were doing, so many bad things. But we don't put ourselves in that position. We don't understand that. I don't know how I got on that track, but I'll get back on the main point of just the fact that everyone does what they believe is best. Oh yes, that's how I got on that point, because there's evil in the world. And isn't it a pity that people thought owning a slave was going to bring them happiness and peace and tranquility? Is that not a pity? Why would you hate someone who is so misguided in their belief system? Why would you not try to help them, show them the way that you have seen? And I think I've touched on that point enough, and I'll get back to the start of the video of, you need to forgive yourself as well. I believe I'm a person, or I am a person who I I have no grudges. I have no ill will towards anyone on this earth. And well, there's one. There's me. I have not completely forgiven myself for the things that I've done, the sins I have committed and things I've did yesterday. There's the things I did the day before. There's things that I have trouble forgiving myself for, but there's no one else in the world that I have not forgiven. And that's why I make this video, because I need to constantly remind myself that I too thought that that thing was best, that that thing I did was the best thing to do. And I shouldn't sit here, and we shouldn't sit here with the power of foresight and say and criticize the version of ourselves who had no foresight, who only had the details that he had, and he made a decision and he was wrong, and that's okay. I think sometimes we forget that the details we now have, that person did not have. And that's the same thing. And I say that person, I mean us in the past. And that's the same thing with other people. If you're a person who has trouble forgiving others, but not yourself, then it's the same point that you need to remind yourself of, that they didn't have the same details as you had. They didn't have the same upbringing. They haven't been through the same scenarios. They don't understand. This is not a reason for you to hate them. This is not a reason for you to be enemies. This is not a reason for you to harbor ill will and prey on their downfall. It is a reason for you to show pity and to try to show them the way. And at the bare minimum, forgive them and, just love them. Because love is truly the answer. And, without being, you know, gushy mushy, biblical forgiveness, love on you guys. I think it is the truth, because where there's love, there's no room for hate. And no one in this world deserves to be hurt. No one in this world deserves to be hated. And that goes for the wrongdoers. It goes for the people who have committed egregious crimes. I'm not saying that justice should not be served, but I am saying that in a world where fire is always fought back with fire, the fire will never end. And in a world where no one stops the cycle of hatred, no someone gets burnt and they say, no, I will not burn back. That is the only way to stop. And I don't think we should look in the outside world for who's doing this, but we should do it ourselves day in and day out on small scales, because that's all we typically can do. And then maybe one day it'll be on a large scale and people will take notice and people will change. And maybe one day we'll live in a world where people forgive themselves and others very easily and don't fight fire with fire. And the people who use fire will see how wrong it is and how they do not need to. That's my little spiel for today. If you cared, I'm in the Dolmanites. This is my view outside my room. It's not too bad. But yeah, that's all. Forgive yourself, forgive others, don't fight fire with fire, and let love set you free.